Hello, my dear friends. Big love to you all, and hope and strength and energy and passion in these completely insane times. I cannot think of anyone I enjoy spending time in the heart more than with my great friend and mentor in so many ways, Matthew Fox. All of you must know something of this extraordinary man, and he has been a source of the deepest inspiration to me ever since I first met him, which is now 30 years ago. And both of us at this time are responding to the horrors and rigors of this time by really inviting in our different ways people to do much more profound spiritual practice. Matthew is laying out a magnificent set of monthly, daily meditations, which he will be talking about. And I am launching on February the 17th, a 40 days, 40 nights journey of profound soul prayer to help us all use the Lenten period to prepare ourselves for the great outburst of resurrecting joy that comes at Easter. And these prayers are taken from all of the universal mystical traditions. They're not just for Christians alone, they're an invitation for all spiritual beings to do the work in prayer to fashion a new being to meet the challenges of our time. And I thought that I'd begin our time together, Matthew, and thank you so much for doing this with me, and thank you for your glorious meditations every day. I thought I'd begin this time together by reading one of Kabir's great poems about the power of prayer in a brutal time. All times, of course, are brutal, but as we both know, this is an especially intransigently brutal time. So here is Kabir, and this is for you, Matthew. The world's ablaze in illusion and desire. The trap of Maya is terrifyingly strong. Only the being who has won the sword of discernment can hack herself free. Take the name of God, my friend, as the boat to cross this brutal ocean. Without it, you'll never reach the other shore. Attaining the name is hard and rare, but I have no need for any other power. From beginning to end and age to age, the name of God binds me directly to God. And I'd love to just, as we resonate with that absolutely fierce and no holds barred poem that is so characteristic of one of our two great universal mystical poets, Kabir, the other one being Rumi, I believe. I would love to begin by asking you, where do you think we are as a human race, and of course as Americans, and why at this time is practice along the lines that you're offering and along the lines that I'm offering so essential and so important?
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me and for saying the nice things you said about me. And I can say ditto to you, that you've been an important friend, an important ally in my journey for sure. And I love your expansiveness and, of course, your interest in and knowledge of what I call deep ecumenism, or drawing from the wisdom of all the world traditions. Because I feel when you go deep enough in any one tradition, you come to this, what I call the underground river of wisdom and of divinity. So I really appreciate the work you've done, not only as a mystic and a passionate preacher, but as a scholar and someone who walks your talk. So our, our, our appreciation for one another is mutual. Well, there's no question, like Kabir is name something very powerful, and you have, that we're living in fierce times. And fierce times require a deepening. We all have to deepen ourselves, a deepening search for truth, for discernment, as Kabir says. And we have to cut through the illusions, both personal, our own illusions, and cultural. And there are plenty of those floating around. So it's a time for truth, isn't it? And that's part of a spiritual practice, is to unpeel the layers of persona, of personhood, of the false self, to get to the deeper self, the truer self, and where, of course, divinity dwells and where truth dwells. And it's interesting that Kabir in that poem is promoting finding the right name for God, if you will, the appropriate name for God. And there are many names for God, but I think truth is one of them. Gandhi said that truth is his favorite name for God, and that is his religion, is God as truth. And there's a lot of untruth, to put it mildly, of disinformation. We've even come up with a new word for it in our culture at this time. There's piles and piles of disinformation that are being sold and bought and all the rest. So the search for truth, I think, is certainly part of the prayer process, isn't it? But I mean, there are other names for God: beauty, and goodness, and love, and energy. And I mean, there's so many, but all of them speak to us because they're calling from below. They're calling from our depths. And that's, I think, what prayer is ultimately, is a getting down to our roots. I define prayer as a radical response to life. But the word radical is so interesting because it's the same as radix, or a root. So getting deep, getting to our roots as a species, our roots as individuals, as members of our community. What are the roots of being an American, for example? And what are the roots of being a male at this time in history? The roots of being a female, and whatever groups they belong to, the roots of being Jewish, the roots of being Black, the roots of being Caucasian or Christian, or Buddhist and Eastern, and journeying into other arenas of depth and roots. I mean, one reason I love your Kabir, your daily Kabir, which I enjoy every day, is I want to hear the wisdom from other traditions. I don't want to just sit, ensconced in my own tradition. I like to see, are there common truths here? Is wisdom truly international and universal? And then if it is, then Buddha's truth will speak to me, and Kabir's truth will speak to me, and Muslim truth will speak to me, the Sufi truth too, and Jewish truth for sure, and so forth. So yeah, the search for truth in a time of lies, disinformation, and ratcheted up desire, which is I think built into the capitalist project, actually, to whip up desires so you'll keep the economic system going. I think all this is asking for critique at this time.
When I rang you to ask you to do this, we had a marvelous hour-long conversation in which we really laid out together our mutual and mutually coherent vision of how the world is now in very extreme danger from all kinds of crises that are coming together, and how especially America is facing its moment of destiny in which it will have to be able to choose with all of its passion democracy or lose democracy to what is now clearly an emergent fascism. And one of the things that you said that struck me so passionately was that it's really time to face evil without illusion, and to face that there are many dark forces operating in our culture at lethal levels of effectiveness that really do make it possible for a monstrous kind of fascism, more dangerous even potentially than German Nazism, to be born in this land that was consecrated by the noble dream of the Constitution. And you let that hang in the air, and I completely agree with you. And then you said something that I've been thinking about very deeply. You said that for you, the opposite of evil is not goodness. It's living a sacred life, living consciously inspired and empowered by a radical, naked, direct connection with sacredness. And I think it's to establish that radical, naked, direct connection with sacredness that you have evolved this year-long meditation every morning, and I am evolving these prayer classes. Can you speak to me of what really inspired you to lay down this journey that you fuel every day with new meditations, new thoughts? And I think you're at the moment dedicating a whole month to your stunning new book, which I've just reread for the fourth time, on Julian of Norwich. Why is it so important to you at this moment when you are working so hard on so many projects to pour yourself into this one?
Well, some people asked me to write daily meditations about 2 years ago when I started to do so on Mother's Day is when we launched it, because Gaia, our mother, is in such trouble today. And I just felt that it was time to kind of coalesce, to focus around the suffering of Mother Earth, because that's the cause of so much other suffering. The coronavirus is born of the disappearing biodiversity of our planet. And so that's the cause behind coronavirus. So why wouldn't we want to focus on the cause of coronavirus as well as on immediate solutions or medicine? But yeah, I just felt that others are doing daily meditations, and I think that's a good idea. But I just felt at this time in my life, why not draw on some of my previous writings and put them together in light of today's crises and, as you say, the fierceness of our time. But this point I make about the opposite of evil is not the good, because the opposite of good is the bad, but the opposite of evil is the sacred. I think that's so important to realize, because the sacred is the arena that is really bigger than the good. The good is wrapped up in it, but it's kind of like Rumi's poem, which of course you know well, about beyond good and evil, there is a field, I will meet you there. Such a beautiful poem. And it takes us out of the realm of moralizing, which is easy to do. Spirituality is much more than moralizing. It requires morality, but morality is not the last word. It is this meeting that is the last word, in the field where the divine and the human meet, and the sacred and nature meet. That's where we want to meet. And so I have nothing against the good or talking about the bad. But I think these other two words, evil and sacred, are bigger words. It's like a lesson I learned from Buck Ghosthorse, a Lakota teacher years ago who worked in my school. We were friends and became good friends. And he said to me one day, in our tradition, fear is the door in the heart that lets evil spirits in. Now that's so interesting, that fear is a door in the heart that lets evil spirits in. So fear is a bad thing most of the time. It can be very dangerous, obviously, but there's even something bigger, and that's the spirit, the evil spirits that come in with it, that come in on its coattails. And so for me, this is a marvelous way of talking about, well, the chakras, really, and about how when we don't pay attention to the chakras to really build up our capacity for love and compassion, the fourth chakra, for example, that so when the fourth chakra is flabby or weak or unbalanced, then not only will fear come in, but other evil spirits will come in. Because I ask the question, why is it that racism and sexism and militarism and power over domination, all those realities they keep coming back every generation. You know, a previous generation, say Dr. King, yes, he stood up to racism, but it has to be done differently in the year 2021. And so what that means to me is the forces we're up against are spiritual forces, just like Paul said, powers and principalities. And that's just what Barkostas was saying, that we're in the realm of spirit when you're dealing with real evil. And the bad acts and bad decisions are the door that let in these evil spirits. And I think just to talk about that is to put the whole conversation into a fuller context. And it also brings it back to your immediate first question, which is, how do we prepare for this? How do we do battle? How do we develop that spiritual warriorhood in all of us so that we do not get overtaken by the demons of our time, such as pessimism, cynicism, despair, and all that, because that goes along with living in a fierce time. You know, Julian said in her time, living through the worst pandemic in Western history, that the two worst problems in her day were acedia and despair. And then I've been thinking about that for quite a while. And I said, oh, that makes sense. You know, when there's a pandemic, when people don't see a way out, and of course they had no science and no promise of a vaccine or anything, you don't see a way out, then this world of despair and this world of acedia, which is a lack of energy to begin new things, it's depression, and it's addiction to television or anything else. You can see it kind of swelling up, these invitations to become cynical and to give up in one way or another. So I think she's really onto something. And so this is where the sacred steps up. The sacred, for me, is kind of a gathering of beauty and goodness and awe, and that which transcends of those things as well, the great mystery.
And passionate hunger to be one with the mystery.
Yes.
Because I think that is so important as part of what belongs to us. Rumi said that the most brave thing that you can do in your life is to let out your passionate longing for God. And that's what the meditations that you give and the prayers that I'm offering are constantly working with, to help people recognize this immense longing and give it a focus, so that through that connection with the great passion force, the great joy force, the great peace force of God, we can be fed passion and peace and joy and, of course, compassion and wisdom. It's a relationship that enables us to be empowered at levels that nothing in our secular world gives us access to, isn't it?
Yes, I'm so glad you mentioned the word wisdom, because I think that's really, for me, that's kind of the basket that holds all this. And I think it also helps to name the struggle between patriarchy and liberation, because wisdom is feminine. She's feminine in the Bible. She's feminine around the world. Kuan Yin is right over my right shoulder here. And our patriarchal culture banishes wisdom. Indeed, our entire educational system in the West, I believe, is oriented today toward knowledge. Now, knowledge is very useful and very important, and it can bring you things like vaccines and so forth, but it does not tell you why. Excuse me, my phone is interfering. It does not tell you why it's important that we put certain values forward. And so the banishment of wisdom, I think, is at the heart of this crisis that we're undergoing. And now I'm going to apologize. I'm going to do something on my phone so this doesn't happen again. Apologize. Didn't think of this before we started talking. But
you were an unwise virgin, not a wise virgin.
Yeah, let me see now.
I think wisdom too is important for another very complex but very rich reason, which I'll try and unveil for you and ask for your commentary on.
Okay, I have trouble dealing with technology when we're talking about important things. So that's what no one calls. Okay, Yes, keep
I
going.
pray to be protected, that you're protected from such technological ravages in our conversation. Look, when Jesus sends the disciples out into the world, he says, I'm sending you out like sheep among wolves. And then he says, he gives the really most extraordinary of all instructions for me in the gospel. He said, what you are required to do is to marry at the greatest depth in yourself the wisdom of the serpent with the innocence of the dove. And at the deepest level, what Jesus is instructing his disciples to do is to face without illusion the horror, the greed, the stupidity, the vulgarity, the cruelty of the shadow, the wisdom of the serpent, the deep, dark wisdom of the darkness in God, the darkness in human nature, the darkness in all of us, so that they can come to understand all the ways in which the dark forces find room in us through fear, through lust for power, through hunger to dominate nature, all the various structures of cold evil that patriarchy has perfected. On the other hand, asking them to pay just as much attention at every moment to the voice of the dove with its visionary promise of redemption, of transfiguration, of history being guided by an invisible mystery of love and of revelation. And the only force that can hold together these extreme opposites, which in our time I would characterize in a special way as being, on the one hand, the possibility of extinction through patriarchy, and on the other hand, the possibility of rebirth and even transfiguration and evolutionary mutation through deep divine practice and through going through this dark night so that we can be born into our divine humanity. Those two extreme opposites, the only way in which they can be held is in the embrace of Sophia, in the embrace of a wisdom that understands the sacredness of both, in a sense, the power of both, and unites the deepest insights and intelligence of both to engender a lover, warrior, midwife of the new, a true disciple of the light in action. So for me, what your meditations are doing are, in the deepest sense, building our wisdom capacity to hold these extreme opposites and invoking the grace of contemplation, of deep lectio divina, of deep, deep integration of the messages of the great mystics you've studied and the great mystic you are yourself, putting them into the depths of ourselves so that we can expand vastly enough to be able to hold these opposites, marry these opposites, and be birthed by that marriage into another level of evolutionary clarity and passion and focus and service. And for me, what prayer does is, as well as expanding wisdom, it unites that expansion of wisdom to an expansion born of intense devotion, of love, of deep, rich, abandoned, surrendered, ecstatic, and sober love. And that when you bring wisdom and love together in that expansive consciousness, you not only can hold these two extreme opposites, but you can be born into being an ever cannier warrior for the new. And I wonder how that sits with you, that particular unfolding.
Well, I think it's very rich. I'm reminded of what Thomas Berry says, that we have to reinvent the human, and that this is a moment we're in history, because clearly, as you say, the path we're on is is toward extinction. It's leading to extinction, and not only our extinction, but that of so many other species, 1 million of which have disappeared in our lifetime. So, from that point of view, it's a requirement. it's a sine qua non for survival. And you would think that most humans would have survival as a value, as a goal. But again, I think this is where wisdom comes in. Now, you read a wonderful poem from Kabir. I just happened today to be typing up this poem from the Book of Wisdom
Oh,
for my daily meditation in a day or two. I like to share it because it's one of my favorite passages in all of Scripture. And we now know, by the way, that the historical Jesus fed from this very tradition, the wisdom tradition. So here's this. I just love this passage. It's from book 7. Simply, I learned about wisdom. Now that's interesting. The word simple, but it's not the same as going to school and getting a PhD, unfortunately. I think we'll agree on that. Simply, I learned about wisdom, the design of the universe. Notice, right off the bat, it's about cosmology. It's about seeing the whole, the force of its elements, beginning and end of time, changes in the sun's course, variation of seasons, cycles of years, positions of stars. Now, to me, this is pure cosmology. Time, space, the sky, history,
the design.
all of it. Changes in the sun's course, variation, cycles, stars, natures of animals. Now we're getting down to earth. Okay. Tempers of beasts, more animals, powers of winds, thoughts of humanity. I just love how late the thoughts of humanity get on board here. I mean, this is that different from the new creation story from science, from the new cosmology, that humans, we come long after the animals, and the stars, and the sun, and time itself, and the forces, the elements of the universe. So all these, you might say, they serve us. They've brought us here, but they precede us. I mean, notice these animals that we're willy-nilly, it seems, willing to make go extinct. I'm thinking of tigers and elephants and polar bears and whales and thought they were here 50 million years longer than we've been here. But then it goes on, thoughts of humanity, uses of plants. Now, it's so interesting to me, it goes from thoughts of humanity right into our intelligence to discover the use of plants. And we use plants for so many things, for their beauty, for their food, for medicines. I mean, all this. And, our ancestors discovered so many medicines in the plants. And we've inherited that. The virtues of roots, such things as are hidden, I learned for wisdom, the artisan of all taught me. I just love that. Wisdom is the artisan of all. And that's, Aquinas says often, God is the artist of artists. So wisdom is an artisan and God is an artist. And this is what it means to be an image of God. So what you talk about, the expansion of wisdom, again, I just find that passage to be delicious.
It's that expansion of wisdom that initiates us into the sacredness of the entire creation, the design of that sacredness, and eventually it initiates us into the deep meaning of the crisis that we are now exploded into. Because if you can keep your wisdom eyes open calmly through contemplation and through prayer, what you will be shown is that, yes, there is a global dark night of the species, as you call it, and I call it a global dark night going on, of unbelievable horror and severity. But even and especially perhaps in the middle of this appalling global dark night, the signs of the evolutionary design of a new embodied divine humanity are also appearing. And it's knowing that through direct revelation, through wisdom, through contemplation and prayer, and sustained contemplation and sustained prayer, that give you the calm, the steadiness, the passion, the energy, the focus to keep on being one of the humble midwives of the birth, even as the death seems so overwhelmingly powerful. In fact, more powerful, but that itself is an illusion that wisdom can help you correct, because it takes the long view, the perspectival view, the view of what Joanna Macy calls deep time. And that is essential for all sacred activists now, for all true seekers now, for all people who know that democracy is in peril and fascism could be born, because it's that perspective and understanding that gives courage.
Yes, and courage, a big heart, courage, a big heart. You know, what grows the heart? And Aquinas says joy grows the heart. And as you say, caring and love, passion grows the heart. And fear shrinks the heart. And self-centeredness shrinks the heart. So the opening up to the wisdom and the joy of different ways to pray, of other traditions, and the beauty that's to be found all around us in nature and in human nature are marvelous accomplishments of music and poetry and ritual and color and languages and song and music. I mean, there's just so many ways in which humanity itself is blessed with wisdom and has been trying to find it and share it for as long as we've been around. You know, how far back does the drum go? How far back does the flute go? You know, our efforts to speak praise, yes, to sing praise, and as Rabbi Hessel says, praise precedes faith. That it's the praise of our being here that should be the table that draws all of us together in our diversity, to celebrate and to give thanks. And it's out of that gratitude.
The Hopis gave us at the end of the 1990s. The Hopi said, a terrible river is coming and many are going to be flooded and taken away by it. But this is a time of celebration. Because as you said about evil, the antidote to and opposite of evil is the sacred. And the opposite of and the antidote to the violence, cruelty, madness, and fascist danger is celebration from the deepest levels of ourselves. And all of the meditations that I've read in your series and all of the prayers that I'm offering in mine are ways either of celebrating nakedly and directly or clearing away everything in us that prevents us recognizing our unity with the creation, and so pouring out our hearts and minds and actions in celebration of it. You say in your book on Julian something that moved me very much. You say that Julian says that prayer is oneing with God. And I know she coined that word, and I would love to know two things. What does Julian mean at the deepest level when she says prayer is oneing with God? And how do you pray? How has your own experience of prayer shaken you and evolved you and inspired you and kept you so creative and vibrant? You're 80 and you've never been pouring out yourself more than you are now. So what's the secret, Matt?
Well, I think Julian's word, of course, Julian was the first woman writer in English. So she coined a lot of language for us. And for example, the word enjoy, she created that word.
Wow, I didn't know
in English. Yeah, she made up the word enjoy. It's from a French word that means to rejoice, but she made it an English word. She created the word. And the word wanting is her word too. And she uses it as a noun, this wanting, and as a verb, to one and to be one to God. And you're right. She talks about prayer as a wanting. Prayer unites us to divinity. But I think is very parallel in other mystics. I think it's what Eckhart meant by breakthrough. And of course, Eckhart came a generation before Julian, but he invented a word in German. These creation mystics were inventing languages all over the place. There wouldn't be an Italian language without Dante and Francis and there wouldn't be the German language we know, I don't think, without Eckhart, and or English without Julian. But and this just shows, mystics have experiences, we all do, that are beyond words and beyond the current language. So you got to come up with something to do. Now, music is good and dance is good, but if you're going to use language, you often have to dig up, create new language to really spell it out or share it, communicate it. And so what Eckhart says about breakthrough, which I think is absolutely parallel to Wanting by Julian, is this. He says, in breakthrough, I learned that God and I are one.
Mm.
So, I mean, that leads right into Julian saying wanting, you see. And of course, this is the mystical experience like Adorank uses the term unio mystica, the mystical union. And we have these experiences of wanting, of breakthrough, where you feel one to the universe, you feel one with all things. And this can happen in the context of joy and celebration, but also in the context of suffering.
Absolutely.
I'll never forget years ago, I was giving a talk, and afterwards this woman said, and I talked about how suffering too can be a mystical experience. And a woman came up to me and she said, my 4-year-old son was dying. And when I realized we couldn't do anything about it, I just sat by his bed hour after hour holding his hand. And she said, never in my whole life before or since have I ever felt so in union with the universe, with history, with God. And, again, that's a simple story, but it's absolutely radical. It's a deep story. And it's true that these wanting experiences can happen in many circumstances. Eckhart says, for a person who is awake, breakthrough does not happen once a year, once a month, once a week, or once a day, but many times every day. So wanting can happen many times. I'll tell you a little story today. I was at my typewriter working on the daily meditations, and I was quoting some juicy stuff from Aquinas about harmony. He had actually defined beauty as harmony. And my dog came and said he had to go outside. So I went to the door here and opened it for my dog, and I just had this experience of harmony, putting him out there. The sun was shining, and these birds were flying very near to us in harmony. And I just felt this tremendous union, this wanting with the great picture of nature. Here's a dog who being on 4 legs and not 2, is much closer to the earth than you and I are. And he was just so happy to join Mother Earth again, that wanting. But in the context, all this other wanting is going on. The birds and the sun was shining and the blue sky. And I just had an experience of harmony and therefore wanting right on the spot. So it wasn't just a word, it was a taste. And of course, the word wisdom comes from the word for taste in Latin and in Hebrew.
I'm so happy that you mentioned animals and suffering, because as you were talking, I was remembering one of the most intense experiences of prayer I've ever had. I had a cat whom I loved abandonedly, the brother of my present cat, who is now the empress of my life. And his name was Topaz. And he was a beautiful golden cat. And he contracted cancer at the age of 5, which was horribly too long. And I took him to the vet, and this beautiful, kind young man came out with him, slightly drugged, and said, and looked into my eyes. He said, you can keep him for 2 months and he'll suffer, or you can summon up your courage. Let him go now. And I looked into Topaz's eyes and I prayed as I'd never prayed before, give me the guidance. And Topaz just radiated back to me in ways I can't describe, but no, true. I'm ready. I trust you. You gave me life. You give me death. So he melted into my chest, and then I put him on the table and I started to stroke him before the needle went in. And then I remembered that Ramana Maharshi had given the cow who loved him liberation when she was dying. Her name was Lakshmi. If you go to his ashram, there's a shrine to her as a liberated being. She had followed him around devotedly and he'd adored her. And when she was dying, he put his hand on her third eye and say, I liberate you. And she was liberated. And so when the needle went in, I found myself praying to Ramana and said to him, I'm not enlightened like you are, but I know that you will answer if I beg you at this moment to give my beloved liberation. And I swear upon my immortal soul that when I put my hand on Topaz's crown center, his whole body relaxed and he took death in without terror. And he just breathed a few times. And it was one of the moments where I really connected with the absolute power born out of absolute suffering of real, intense, sincere prayer. It is answered by love when your suffering has exposed you to the depths of your own love.
Well, that's very beautiful. And thank you for sharing it. Very, very beautiful. It actually triggers an experience I had with my dog Tristan, who was my spiritual director for 15 years. And I was at my typewriter one day. I think I was writing my Aquinas book, and I realized I'd put him outdoors and he hadn't returned. So I went out to find him, and he had collapsed on the lawn. And it was Friday, so it was a weekend. I couldn't take him to the regular vet. I took him to a different vet who didn't know him, and they said, "Well, he'll keep him for the weekend." And so I went back on Monday morning, and they said, "This is serious. You should take him to your regular vet." So I went to my vet, and they said, "Well, give us 3 hours, and we'll come over and see whether you should let him go or not." So I went home and I got the call, and the call said we should put him to death to make, to just like your case, so it wouldn't be any more suffering. And I said, okay, I'll be right down. And it took me 20 minutes to get there. And I walked in the door of the vet. They said, your dog has died. And I remember saying, I really wanted to say goodbye and thank him. What is the meaning of this? And then the vet said, she said, you and your dog must have had an amazing relationship. And I said, why? She said, because as soon as I hung up the phone, your dog died. He was waiting for your permission. And then it made all the sense in the world, because Tristan was very independent. He didn't need a human being to put him to death. He just wanted my permission to let him go. So it's interesting that you and I are talking about our pets when we're talking about wanting, but this is very real for a lot of people.
Oh my God!
This is where a lot of human love is.
Greatest initiation in my life. The love of animals has been a revelation of what love is to me. I mean, human love is wonderful, but it's so complicated by psychology and drama and karma and trauma. But there seems something perfectly pure in the love of animals, and I feel that being with my animal is almost the deepest form of prayer that I know, because it's wordless love in action. It's wordless prayer. It's prayer with touch. It's prayer with caress. It's prayer with adoration. And when I lived with Eric, we made up 108 names for our cat at the time, who was called Purple, and they were all modeled after the Sanskrit names for the goddess. And when we went shopping, we would say the 108 names in row to celebrate her existence. Such is the madness of animal lovers. But I want
some of them, I think.
How do you pray? What is prayer for you at this moment of your life? What are the prayers that you cling to or love to say? If it's not too personal, I think it would be wonderful. We would all love to know.
Well, I like the Psalms. I like to pray the Psalms, and of course the mystics. And I just love it when, I'm glad that you're enjoying Julian. And these sentences just jump out at you. and wrap themselves around your neck, uh, and they confirm my own deepest experience. So in a way, I'm just always open to hearing the word of God, and by that I mean interact. I mean, we're talking now about animals as words of God. You see that they're other Christs who are speaking to us, and and communicating um, with angels, calling on the spirits, calling on ancestors. Um, Recently, a shaman told me that some of my deceased friends and co-workers were coming to my birthday party that
Yes.
was celebrated the other day,
Jose, yes.
and there they were. And so I just find that poets and musicians and mystics of all kinds are speaking to us from the other side on a regular basis. And the key is that we be listening. It's that listening heart. And that's part of the Lectio Divina. So I'm blessed because my work is so easy to see my work as prayer, the kind of work that I get to do in the world. Um, and But finding silence is very important to me, and this is one reason I like to go into nature with my dog. And as you say, animals are wordless most of the time, and so uh, that and just beauty wherever it presents itself. Now I do sometimes chant mantras. I make up mantras and I chant familiar mantras, um, and I find that repetition of something, which is like a beat also, that it's a great way of kind of getting my mind out of problem solving and more into the centering process. Um, but I try to stay fresh by um, learning new insights. Um, the, just recently, I ran across a beautiful uh, teaching from Simone Weil, or is reminded of it, how she says, that you have to begin with the universe. You have to begin with the universe if you're going to deal with suffering. And
Mm.
I just found that so affirming of really everything we've been talking about, of this wisdom passage of cosmology, um, that suffering will take you into the universe itself. And I don't know. There's so many beautiful teachers over the centuries from all traditions that any one of them can trip me up and can give me an insight that I can just play with all day long. And Aquinas says the nearest thing to contemplation is play. The contemplation is playing with wisdom, he says.
Right.
And so that kind of play feeds me.
And that's
And
what Thomas Merton says. He says that Sophia is a mother longing to play with her children.
ha.
And what I found is that short prayers
Mm-hmm.
have, for me, the greatest impact.
Mm-hmm.
John Cassian, in his famous book on prayer, he said, don't pray long prayers. Your mind will get involved with them. Find short phrases that really thrill you and focus your whole being. So I spent 30 years collecting in special notebooks my favorite short prayers from all the traditions, and I put them into the book that I wrote called Light the Flame, which you so kindly champion. And I've drawn on that book for the 40 days, 40 nights, intense short prayers from all of these traditions. Because what I found is this, Matt, and I wonder if this corresponds with your own experience. I found that when you pray intensely and play with the wisdom, the charged wisdom of a short prayer, it takes you even more deeply into the silence in which you'll hear what Job called the hidden word. The prayer acts as the opening of the door of your being to the luminous silence, which then, if you just sit in it with the whole of you, will start speaking or singing to you and guiding you from your own unified depths.
Mhm.
Is that an experience that you?
Oh, definitely. And that's exactly what the Christian tradition calls contemplation, distinct from meditation.
Right.
From the East, they're looked at differently, but the West is pretty straightforward about that. The meditation is thinking on things and getting to places, but then you get to this point of entering the silence, and then the silence speaks back to you. I remember when I was a novice, I would have been about 19 years old, and we had a lot of meditation, at least an hour in the morning, an hour in the afternoon. But I remember once I found this one short statement in the scriptures that said, it was from the Hebrew Bible, it said, "Son, give me your heart." That was one short sentence. And I just dwelled on that sentence, I think, for 3 weeks. It's exactly what you're talking about, that you kind of swim in this truth, in this insight, in this wisdom, and it talks to you. But I'll never forget that. I mean, that was a lot of years ago. I'm 80 now.
Very
The Son, give me your heart. It just hit me. I was 19, and I wanted to explore just those 5 words. What does it mean? And it just took me places, took me on a trip.
The phrase that did it for me at exactly the same age
Oh,
was, "A broken and a contrite heart I will not despise."
hmm.
For some reason, I must have had a broken, but probably not very contrite heart at the time. And that phrase
Hmm.
revealed to me, as I meditated on it, just abyss after abyss of the mercy and the forgiveness and
Hmm.
the compassion.
And was that line from the scriptures, or where was that from? Yeah.
Says it.
Uh-huh.
And I wanted, because our time is coming to an end, I wanted to read to you. You know that I'm working on Hadovich of Antwerp, the great 13th century mystic.
Hmm.
And she wrote an extraordinary poem about the hidden word, just
Hmm.
this, what we're speaking of.
Hmm.
And for her, prayer and contemplation and all rituals and all ways of approaching God were to help you get into the depths of the silence in which you'd be ready with your whole being to receive the word that
Hmm.
nothing but love could speak,
Hmm.
the divine word that could save you and guide you. And this is what she wrote. She wrote, and let me put on my glasses because of the mad changing light. I know you love this. Wait on the hidden word. Do not do anything from your own will, believing in your own wisdom, until love's silence has spoken. Others will not understand or think you crazy or lazy, but what do they know? Love knows all things, and you will know what to do and how to do it if only you fix your heart on love always and love alone. This is how true lovers live, patiently waiting, sometimes through long dark years, for love to speak, and then acting in great joy, boundless trust, giving their all. I am not speaking of what I read. I am speaking of what I know, what I have come to learn through many storms and bitter mistakes.
Hmm.
And for me, what you're presenting in your daily meditations and what I've carefully calibrated in this universal prayer journey to help all beings prepare for the birth of the divine human in them, symbolically on Easter, both of our activities are about helping people to enter that quantum field of silent, direct union from which love can speak its own hidden words to guide us and inspire us and encourage us and infuse us and guide us to our mission and embolden us on that mission. That's my experience of prayer. Does that ring true for you?
Oh, very definitely. That's a wonderful passage from Hedwig. Um, and it parallels the sentence from Julian that I just loved. Charged with the quality of reverence and loving awe, we turn ourselves with all our might toward the actions to which we are guided. To me, that's very parallel to what
Can you repeat
Edris
that
just said.
before
That action comes out of this encounter with the mystery, with the silent word and the divine presence, once you've learned to listen deeply. But that word charge is so wonderful. I mean, it's 600 years before we knew about electrical charges, but I just love that word, charged with the quality of reverence and loving awe. We turn ourselves with all our might toward good actions. And Hedridge just said something very parallel to that, that out of this emptying and this listening, deep listening to silence and to mystery and to love, which is mystery, we're ready to move into action. And then it's like a circle. And then with the action, then there are times we want to return to this contemplation, to this receiving. And so it's like a circle or a spiral that keeps expanding and keeps going. And that's how we get recharged and keep up the struggle with joy and good humor.
Good humor,
which you embody wonderfully. And craziness.
And craziness, yes,
Yeah.
I like craziness too, because my God, we need more of that on the earth. Talking about divine craziness, I met
You're a champion.
in the 1980s when I was a little boy, sort of. And because I was young, I asked her really, point blank kind of question, and she was very pleased to answer it. I said, "How the hell do you do it?" And I remember saying that, "How the hell do you get up every morning and go out into that ocean of boiling misery and collect the poor and the dead and bring them back and help them die?" And she said, "There is only one way. You can do it. And it's prayer." And what I do is that in the early morning at about 5, I get up and I sit in front of the host and I pray in the depths of my heart to Jesus. And all I'm asking is to be filled up. And then I go out into my day and I pour out what I've been filled up with. And I go to bed completely smashed and exhausted. And I get up and do exactly the same thing the next day. That is about the greatest instruction on the power of prayer that you could ever have from someone who not only prayed her life into being, but lived her life as prayer. And I think it's so important to say to people tenderly that when they dive into your meditations and when they take this journey into prayer, it's not to leave the world, it's to be able to enter the world with more power, more energy, more peace, more passion, more humor, more divine craziness than ever, so that you can do God's work in your own unique way in this appalling time.
Yes, to be charged up. Yep.
Thank you for charging me up, Matt. Thank you for sharing.
Well, thank you
us that you've
for
shared.
charging
Beautiful talk.
thousands of people up. You
And
do
I
that.
encourage everybody who's listening into my group to plunge into Matt's amazing meditations. They give me great joy and inspiration. And I hope that all of you who are listening from Matt's group will jump into this prayer journey and let it prepare you to be a midwife warrior of the birth in this time of the great death. Amen.
Amen.
Love you, Matt. Thank you so